their own or retrofit it with something.
This secret became a burden Lazar couldn't bear to carry, even though he knew the risks involved in telling the truth.
Agents from the OFI, the Office of Federal Investigation, had been witnessed doing random security checks at his house. There was almost no question in anyone's mind, anyone in Bob's immediate life who talked with him on the telephone, that his phone was tapped. I mean, strange things would happen on Bob's phone and really continue to this day, which happens with no one else you talk to in your entire environment.
And I felt it was really worthwhile to tell somebody.
So Lazar arranged a nighttime excursion for himself and some close friends.
I believe it was 8 or 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, somewhere in March, '89, I believe. We went out with Gene Huff, my ex-wife, and John Lear. At that time, there were no signs up. Really, no one knew what was going on. There was no alien. There was a little Rachel Bar and Grill up there, but you could drive in a lot further than you could now. There was really no security patrols going on. No one had even bothered the area. So we did get in pretty far and get some good looks at what was going on.
There was an elliptically shaped light that came up and did step moves in the sky and danced around, and essentially looked like you'd see a flying saucer portrayed in the movies.
Darting from one side of the sky to the other, doing some impossible flight characteristics.
It looks like an explosion that starts to explode and stops and doesn't explode and dissipate. That's how bright the light is. Your brain interprets it as an explosion about to happen.
I believe we saw some other chase helicopters or some other craft come up, follow it around, and then it set back down.
Considering the fact that Bob predicted when the test would be, he had described what the motion would be before we went there. When we saw it, it proved to be exhilarating. It was an amazing experience, and it did everything Bob said it would do. It came up at the time he said it would, and so I have to believe it.
But at times the craft had glowed tremendously bright, where we thought, being miles and miles away, we thought there was something wrong and the craft was going to explode, so much so that we all got behind the car. So it was pretty exciting.
They made 3 visits in all. On the 3rd, the inevitable happened. They were caught.
That night when we got stopped, I would imagine would be the turning point where things turned really bad. I was taken to the Indian Springs Auxiliary Air Force Base and debriefed there. And there they had some of the guards that had caught us. Dennis Mariani, my supervisor, some other people down there. They threatened my wife. They threatened to kill my wife. They stopped. They said they'd stop at nothing. They were crazy. They really were. They were completely out of control.
Bob went public to protect himself.
And I knew immediately if his credentials could be verified, if even part of his story could be verified, it'd be one tremendous expose.
I would say initially, when George first started looking at everything, it was skeptical. However, very quickly after he started checking a few things, I began to take it very seriously. And when it was aired, that interview went virtually around the world. I mean, I saw that was something that was just put in the 5 o'clock news here in Las Vegas, and I have seen that tape played in Japan.
Several people began to examine his past. Had he really worked at Area 51? Was he even qualified to have done so?
I did a variety of research relative to Bob Lazar. I actually met him. I obtained a copy of his, what they call a W-2 form, which is one of the IRS documents associated with pay. His particular form indicated that he worked for the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence. My investigation of this document and the claims that Bob Lazar made followed a very strict path of sound research. I contacted the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence and indeed verified that they were likely responsible for presenting that W-2. I investigated the issue with the Internal Revenue Service. They informed me the exact words were, it appears to be legit, that it was a genuine document. It was not something that had been fabricated. There were a variety of numbers, contract numbers and so forth, issued on the document, which I was able to research, again finding that these were highly classified numbers. In fact, Internal Revenue Service ran into a brick wall when it came to trying to track down the actual employer associated with the document. And then again, with the Social Security Administration, we found that Bob Lazar's records had in fact been bleached clean. There was nothing there, in spite of the fact that the document clearly indicated that Social Security taxes had been taken out of his pay.
Not all are convinced. Noted ufologist and former Apollo scientist Stanton Friedman is skeptical.
I've looked at considerable depth into Bob Lazar's claims, both about himself and about propulsion system. Those are fairly elaborate claims. I've talked to the schools that he claims to have received degrees from. I've checked on his high school record. I talked to Los Alamos Lab, where he was supposedly a scientist and so forth. I have come up totally empty, except for finding that he did attend some classes at Pierce Junior College in Southern California in the late 70s.
I probably would never have taken on the task of investigating Bob Lazar's W-2 form had it not been for the fact that he passed a seriously applied polygraph examination. And the thing that is interesting about polygraph is that if you're embellishing or if you don't completely believe what you're saying, it is very, very easy to detect. All it really will tell you is that the individual believes with 100% conviction that what he's reporting is exactly as he recalls and as he believes it to be. And that clearly was the case with Bob Lazar.
Could the U.S. military really be working with alien technology? And if they are, do they have any choice in the matter? U.S. Navy physicist Dr. Bruce Maccabee has his own theories. He spends his free time using computer technology to examine the veracity of video and photographic evidence of UFO sightings, many of them from Area 51.
There has been the question ever since 1947 of whether or not these objects could be made by human beings. Now, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that we might nowadays be able to build something with somewhat comparable characteristics. However, when this began, that was a demonstrably impossible situation. Not only that, but we have an interesting confirmation of the fact that the Air Force didn't make anything. In 1947, in the summer, the Air Force asked the FBI to investigate witnesses to these flying discs. And somebody suggested to one of the FBI agents that, gee, maybe they're our things. And Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI at the time, decided that it wasn't a good idea for us to be investigating our own things. And he says, if we're going to investigate, we want a statement from the Air Force that we're not investigating our own secret projects. Air Force wrote to J. Edgar Hoover a letter saying we've checked all of our research projects, etc. You know, this would be not just the Air Force, but the Navy and the Army, everybody. And we have nothing that could create these flying disc sightings. So that rules it out right there. I mean, the Air Force was denying any involvement at all, and they were just as worried about what these things were as everybody else.
One man with special experience of outer space and cutting-edge technology is former astronaut and sixth man on the moon, Edgar Mitchell. Since being a part of the Apollo missions, he is now on the outside, trying to peer behind the wall of secrecy.
The thing that's convinced me that contact has been made is individuals in government positions, high government positions, who are credible, who have reported to me that in their official duties they have had first-hand experience and they're prepared to talk about it, would like to be released from security oaths so that they can talk about it.
I got a lot of calls from former workers at the base. I have now talked, in the years since, I have interviewed or talked to people who worked there in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, who all tell basically the same story. Not all of them have the same breadth and depth of the story that Bob is telling,